What's up, comrades? How's it going? It is no secret that Bloodborne is one of the highest rated games of all time, from players and critics alike. Everyone loves it, I adore it, you idolize it, Metacritic worships it. I mean, who doesn't love it? Wait, what are you?
You, brother, just... You...
Obviously, I have fond memories of that game. It was my first Souls, it's the one that made me fall in love with the genre. So, when I see that Game Critics was the only official reviewer to give it a yellow rating, instead of a green one like everyone else, I had to check what they had to say about it.
Before we start, let me get it crystal clear that this is not me going against someone for giving the game a lower mark than I expected, but rather me trying to check out if the person had the right fundamentals to rate it a 7 out of 10, or if they were just making shit up. So I've skipped the first few paragraphs because we all know how journalists are, it takes them too long to get to the actual point.
Summarizing, he characterizes Souls gaming as an experience that tests your preparation, situational awareness, and one's ability to learn from their own mistakes rather than being a series that stand out for requiring quick reflexes, which are necessary sometimes but are not a part of the core gameplay.
So that demonstrates that he knows his stuff. He's not a filthy casual, which makes me wonder even more, why did he rate it a 7 out of 10? Bloodborne is just too hard. Not at all, but let's see how he justifies it. Bloodborne takes us to the city of Yharnam, where the residents are rumored to use blood in magic healing rituals. Of course, the city is a ruined hellscape, so the player must deal with all manner of creatures and traps while on the quest to find a cure for their disease. Bloodborne is a very well-made game, the atmosphere in Yharnam is grisly and creepy and perfectly sets up a strong Lovecraft theme, and I mean that in every sense of the term, not just Cthulhu shows up at some point. Along with the aesthetics, From's mastery of level design is on full display here, with clever pathing and shortcut placement. In this sense, Bloodborne feels very much like a superb 3D Castlevania. So far so good, although he hasn't said why he thinks the game is so hard, which might be coming any time now. However, Bloodborne's combat asks much more of the player than previous From Software games. This shift was clearly a calculated design choice, but it was tough for me to appreciate the differences after becoming so aggravated from dying to the same cheap shots over and over. One thing I would like to remark is that this review was published on May 3rd, 2015, 1 month and a half after the original release of the game. So I kind of understand that this is too difficult vibe because From Software outdoes itself with every standalone title that they release when it comes to difficulty.
When Sekiro was released, journalists were all asking for an easy mode because of how excruciatingly hard it was, which was delivered in Elden Ring in the form of summons. I understand he could feel this, but I don't agree with the take. The combat asks much more of the player? What was his aim here? For the gameplay to stay the same as in Dark Souls? Another turtle behind a shield game. At its core, Bloodborne only asks you to dodge, attack, and maybe parry. I would say it asks less of the player, because now you don't have the block with a shield option.
Previous Souls games have taught the player to be cautious above all else. Learning when to defend, attack, dodge, and when to run are skills one must learn to survive. That's changed with Bloodborne, as defensive tactics are almost non-existent. With no worthwhile shields available, protecting oneself is limited to dodging and parrying. Look, he even says it here. It is limited to dodging and parrying. Now, I get that not blocking means actually learning the boss's attacks, strings and openings, but that doesn't take too long either.
Humans, or semi-humans like German, Mikolash, Gascoigne, and Maria were parryable, and parrying with a gun was much easier than doing it with a shield. Sometimes you could just spam shots during the boss's telegraphing, and sometimes you could get a lucky parry if his attack's not interrupted. Beasts, on the other hand, were staggerable for each limb if you dealt a lot of damage to it. I've even seen a video where Vicar Amelia didn't attack a single time before the player killed it. and the player abused that mechanic, and overall bosses were easier to read, moves were simpler, nothing too fancy like that pile of garbage called Concerts Radan. Well, let's continue.
This change means that Souls veterans will essentially have to learn the rules of play all over again, this time without training wheels. It's an interesting evolution of the Souls formula as it rewards a much faster and more aggressive style of combat. Supporting this is a mechanic to regenerate HP, restoring lost health to the player if she returns the damage immediately after receiving it. It's clear that the focus is now on offense more than ever was before. So it seems like he was definitely a shield player, the ones that carried a grass-crest shield on their back for that, extra stamina regeneration, which is not something bad. It just tells me that why he is against the offense-focused combat so much. Like, veterans will have to learn the rules of play all over again?
This is not Devil May Cry, the mechanics were never that deep, neither in Dark Souls nor Bloodborne. I mean, aren't we playing a fast-paced Dark Souls with health regen and cooler armor pieces? It seems like an exaggeration to say, they reinvented the wheel with this one, we'll have to reprogram our brains, fellas. We can say that about Sekiro, but not Bloodborne.
Unfortunately, this focus on aggression comes with a few drawbacks, the most obvious being that other playstyles viable in previous games are obsolete or simply don't exist here. One of the best things about Souls is that the player could tailor their character builds to their own personal preference, be a shield-carrying tank, an nimble dagger user, a long-range spellcaster, and more. Any of these were options that gave the player choice. In Bloodborne, the focus on speed and reflexes means there's only one style that works. Sure, there are different weapons with different movesets that can be changed depending on the situation, but they all boil down to the same closing melee playstyle, which is disappointing given the variety that players could previously count on.
That is absolutely true, and there's no arguing here. There is no way you can get a proper arcane build in the beginning if you go in blind first playthrough ever. You have to invest a lot in arcane. There aren't enough gems or tools that will allow you to make a good use of that build until much later on in the game. And with all the cool tricking weapons the game has, why would you even rely on spells mostly? I always use them for style points, not for damage.
The lack of defensive options especially hurts when it comes to bosses. It's complaining about the lack of defense again, okay. Their patterns and animations can be hard to read, meaning that it's easy to be caught off guard and quickly killed, especially with the persistent problems I have had with the camera. Too often my view of the action was obscured by scenery or when the camera would get hung up on geometry in smaller areas. It would also get tangled up with some of the larger bosses as well, a common cause of many defeats.
Bosses were hard to read. Oh no, I don't think so. Maybe they seemed like it because you were too used to playing with shields, and now that you have to fully understand attack tells and anticipations, you get lost. No shame in it, you cannot be good at something that you haven't trained. The camera can be a hassle from time to time, although uniquely with big bosses in cramped spaces, such as Vicar Amelia, the One Reborn, Lawrence, and perhaps the Cleric Beast. The rest were fought in medium to big-sized arenas where you would hit the wall if you didn't manage your spacing. I mean, you said it before, Souls gaming is all about situational awareness. Why is it that the camera is being so troublesome for you? Is it because now that you don't have shields you start panic rolling to get away until you hit a wall? We'll never know.
I'll leave these here for a second and I will summarize them, so pause in case you want to read them. But briefly, he complains about the blood vial system and the online connection.
Regarding the blood vials, I also complained about them in my video dedicated to Bloodborne's state in 2023. The farming is unnecessary, and although many comments told me to just buy them, I didn't want to spend my eccles in vials instead of levels because I wanted my hunter to be able to use a bit of everything: arcane, blood tinge, strength, skill. By spending eccles on vials, I would end up with a quite unidimensional character that can only wield a few weapons of a set category, and I wanted to try everything, or at least almost everything, and not have to restart from scratch to make a new build or have to arrive to New Game +6.
He also stated that You can buy them from the shop, although he fails to mention that they are unlimited and they are quite cheap, so you're not 100% compelled to farm them. Still, it was a step down from previous deliveries, just not as much as he makes it out to be. Regarding the multiplayer, he calls it abysmal.
Bro, I'm lagging!
Which I think is a very strong word for a game that actually made it easier for you to match up with your friends and other co-op partners. Think about Dark Souls 2, the previous installment, whose multiplayer, in my opinion, was a total train wreck.
The matchmaking was not based on level anymore, but on the souls you've earned with a character. There were brackets that allowed you and your friends to match, as you can see here. If I am in bracket 8 and my friend is in bracket 16 because he has played a bit longer than I have, it is impossible for us to match and play together. Something that wouldn't happen in Bloodborne because, for one, the range is 40 levels above or below your character, meaning if I am level 100, I can summon a level 60 or a level 140 player. What's better, if you share a password with a friend, there is no level restriction, you just need the area's boss to be alive. In Dark Souls 2, what you have instead of passwording is an engraved ring, which allows you to choose a god. If you and your friend choose the same god, the bracket margin can be increased by like 1 or 2, which is stupid. I am wasting a ring slot just to have slight better odds to play with a friend? That's for co-op. Then invasions were much better too. Don't want to be invaded in Bloodborne? Just kill the Bell Maiden, which only appears if you summon, except in the nightmare areas. Don't want to be invaded in Dark Souls 2? Burn a human effigy at a bonfire, this highly valuable consumable that restores your HP to normal because getting reduced HP after each death was a thing in this game for some fucking reason. Well, by doing that, invasions and co-oping alike will be blocked for 30 minutes in this bonfire's area only. The area is limited to a perimeter, and you get no jolly cooperation? Who the fuck thought about this? Or you can just consume the effigy to be human again, since you can only be invaded while hollow. But pick your poison, right? Burn an effigy and limit invasions for 30 minutes in a small area, or consume it, probably die in the next 5 seconds by a gank of 12.5 enemies in a small room, and get back to square fucking one.
Anyway, why am I crushing Dark Souls 2 so much? Well, firstly, like I said before, it is Bloodborne's predecessor, so it's okay to compare it if I want to show the improvements that Bloodborne has made when it comes to online gaming. And secondly, the same magazine gave Dark Souls 2 a 9 out of 10, which is up for debate. If you have watched some of my previous videos, you will know that Dark Souls 2, though not a bad game, it is my least favorite Dark Souls out there because I think the others are miles ahead of it. But what matters is, in their Dark Souls 2 review, they didn't criticize its multiplayer, not even once. How is that even possible, for Christ's sake? To be fair, the article writers were 2 different people, which makes me wonder, out of pure curiosity and ignorance, even though there were 2 writers, shouldn't GameCritics.com try to keep a sense of linearity to their reviews?
Imagine, 1 year IGN reviews FIFA 23 and says, "The game is amazing, you can kick balls and run like never before," rating it a 10 out of 10. And then, for FIFA 24, a different IGN reviewer rates it a 4 out of 10 because you can only kick balls and run. Granted, they know that humans can count lower than 8 out of 10, of course.
Briefly, why is a dude not addressing what can be the worst multiplayer ever in Souls gaming? And why is another dude calling abysmal what arguably could be the best multiplayer ever in From Software games? Then he goes on to say that he spent valuable resources without getting any reward for it, which was true for the time of his review, but just 2 months later, From Software fixed it, and now if you consume an insight to ring the bell and you don't get any help, after you die you will recover the insight that you used. But, well, I mean, I'll give you the reason for that one because I also think that it was an overlook from them, but to call it a valuable resource.
My brother in Christ, there's like 200 plus insights in the main story alone. Then, multiplayer and chalices can make it an infinite amount, since they are technically farmable. Even if you don't do the latter, just by discovering new locations, consuming Madman's knowledge, and killing some bosses, you have more than enough to use the bell till you get PTSD from its ringing. And even if it does not work, you get some hidden benefits from the game, like having less than 15 insight makes the church enemies easier to kill, since they will have less moves. 0 insight will cause the mad ones not to appear in the Witches of Hemwick fight. Your Hunter Frenzy buildup takes longer to increase, since the dumber you are, the less paranoid you go, which is very useful for Nightmare of Menses as a whole.
Your experience was laggy. It can happen. Bloodborne doesn't have dedicated servers, unlike other games. At any rate, to my knowledge, Bloodborne was not known as a laggy game. But do you know what game was known for its lagginess in multiplayer? Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls Remastered. Very well known for their lag stabs and terrible connection, which they also did not address in their Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls Remastered review, where they gave the game an 8 out of 10. Certain aspects of Bloodborne, like the level design, audio design, and art direction, show that in most regards it's an exceptionally well-made game. Every change feels like a conscious effort to create something that stands apart from the developer's previous work, and such an attempt is commendable. However, Bloodborne bumps up the overall difficulty while taking away the options that made Souls approachable to all players. In its current state, it feels like it caters too much to the Twitch experts and doesn't bend to the rest of us. A challenge that feels like a learning experience is welcome, but Bloodborne too often feel like it was kicking me in the balls and leaving me helpless to do anything about it. So today's conclusion is, you are the best judge for a game, okay? Reviewers, despite being professional gaming journalists, they are still humans, with preferences and a certain skill sets that might make a game harder or easier for them, which is going to bias their review. Imagine passing on Bloodborne because you think it's just an average 7 out of 10 game. Luckily, it did not happen to me. Are we getting Bloodborne 2 yet, Sony?